It really is a massive pleasure for me to talk to you this afternoon. And the title of this talk, Thinking with Robert Smithson. So what does it mean to think with an artist? Well, for me, thinking with is the very reason why we make exhibitions and why we go to exhibitions. By thinking with artists, we have the possibility of rethinking what we think we know. And with this comes the potential of changing this incredibly complicated world that we exist in. So I don't believe, maybe controversially, but I don't believe that art can change the world. But I firmly believe art can change perceptions. And with this, we can indeed change the world. So I think changing our multiple versions of the present is really what art is all about. And by thinking with artists, we can open routes to possible futures that in all other realms seem impossible. And one of the many, many reasons why I love SITESANTAFE so much is that it always starts with artists. It presents an artist-centric program that always seems to address the most urgent questions of our time. So, what does it mean to think with Robert Smithson? Now, in truth, there are so many things that I want to share with you. And I need just to choose a few, otherwise we will be here until this time tomorrow and I will get hungry and grumpy and then we'll have to go. So my plan is to try my hardest to talk for around 40 minutes. Then we can talk together a little. And I really want to see this as being the start of an ongoing conversation as we move towards the launch of the exhibition Teresita Fernández, Robert Smithson, in just a few weeks. Now, as I talk, I'm going to show images and some moving images. Some of the images I will talk directly to. Others are there to allude to ideas that I just don't have time to talk about. And other works you will see with your own eyes at SITE directly next month. And we can talk much more then. Now, as I like to talk, I have to prepare a script to try and keep me to time. But just in case I run out of images, I've got plenty more that I want to show you. So to start in a way, some coordinates. Who is Robert Smithson? He was born in Passaic in New Jersey in 1938, and he was an artist who expanded what art could be and where it can be found. And for over 50 years, his writings, art, and ideas have influenced artists and thinkers. And I really, truly believe that his work has built the ground from which contemporary art has grown. So as Matthew said, I have this amazing job being the first Executive Director of Holt Smithson Foundation. And our job is to think about his legacy. So what is legacy? Legacy is about how ideas vibrate with multiple versions of the present. And it's absolutely not about sitting in the past, about pickling ideas from artists in the vinegar of their own present. Now, for an artist, the most important part of a legacy is how their art and ideas resonate with the art of today. And this really matters to us at Holt Smithson Foundation. And it informs everything that we do. So this exhibition that we're about to install tomorrow morning, which I'm impossibly overexcited about, to think with Teresita Fernández here in our home-based city is of immense importance to us. And I'm always interested in thinking about why Smithson's art and ideas continue to press on the present, about why his art and ideas are so fascinating for artists. So Smithson was an autodidact. He was a self-taught artist. And he was interested in so many things. He was interested in travel, in cartography, in geology, in architectural ruins, in prehistory, philosophy, science fiction, popular culture, language. All of these ideas spiral through his work. When he spoke about his beginnings, Smithson always described his childhood interests in travel, in prehistory, in turtles, in dinosaurs, in collecting shells, in collecting rocks and reptiles. For him, this was the beginning. And in his short and prolific life, he died in an airplane accident in 1973, age 35. Smithson produced paintings, drawings, sculpture, earthworks, architectural proposals, films, photographs, slide works, writings, and all the stops between. So Smithson was really interested in exploring the conceptual and physical boundaries of knowledge. And by doing this, he really raised essential questions about the world. He was interested in all kinds of belief systems. So systems, assumptions, beliefs. This is how we operate as human beings. He was interested in history, in magic, in superstition, in religion, in mapping, in time. Smithson was someone who wanted to show these systems, to reveal them, to reveal how we humans deal with the imponderables of time and space. And I really think it's this that draws so many artists to his work. Okay, so where to begin, though, to talk about Smithson's artwork? I always like to start in the middle, because this is where all things start. And from here, as I will do this afternoon, we meander through ideas. No matter the topic, we enter into conversations and ideas that have been swirling around long before we arrived. And it is here that we pick them up. And that moment is so exciting when we do not know what came before or what comes after. For Robert Smithson, I always think that the middle is Spiral Jetty, perhaps his most referenced artwork, and one that pushes at what comes next and pulls at what has come before. Spiral Jetty is many things. It is not what it was, and what it is now is not what it will be. So it really is many things. It's an earthwork, it's an essay, it's a film, it's a rumor, it's a journey, it's a series of drawings, and it's a field of research. This is what Smithson's work is all about. All of these oscillations of being human. And when I think about his work, I think it's all about the humanity and inhumanity of simply being and how that interconnects with everything around us. Not just with humans, but with all animal, mineral, and vegetable earth beings. So Spiral Jetty, how is this artwork situated within art history? Art history, I always think, is different from art. And again, what I love about SITE is it's more about art than art history. So Spiral Jetty as an artwork, as an earthwork, comprises exactly what its title suggests. It's a pathway that, when it was first made, spiraled from the shore into a body of water. It's made from rocks gathered at this edge point. To be precise, 6,650 tons of rock and earth were moved by bulldozers into a spiral that stretches 1,500 feet in length and 15 feet in width. The sculpture is located at Roselle Point on the shore of the Great Salt Lake in Utah, and it's a saline terminal link where the brine shrimp inhabitants turn the water into a pinkish color. And this particular ecology really fascinated Smithson. He first became interested in salt lakes 2 years previously, in 1968, when he visited Mono Lake in California. And he also discovered the existence of this red water, which he called tomato soup color. It's caused by microbacteria. And he first read about its occurrence in the Atacama, and he really wanted to go there. But back then, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, such travel was much harder than it is today. Smithson was always interested in location, in site, and he was fascinated by the point of Spiral Jetty's relationship to an abandoned oil jetty that sits just before the sculpture and its closest historically significant marker, the Golden Spike Monument. Now, this is a place, I know some people here will have visited it, but this is a curious place. It memorializes the completion of the first transcontinental railroad in the US. It's where the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific Railroads met on May the 10th in 1869. And this connection, when it happened, was turned into a monument. It was memorialized by driving a golden stake into the ground. Now, the building of this railroad was much more than simply building a transportation structure. It had an impact on the ecology of the area and also an impact on the labor. So in the making of this railroad, hundreds, thousands of Chinese workers were employed at a much lower rate than their white counterparts. Now, if you saw my notes, you would see I have scare quotes around historically significant marker. History is always partial, always full of holes that need to be looked into. Robert Smithson was acutely aware of this. In fact, there's a section of the film Spiral Jetty where he says, "The Earth's history seems, at times, like a story recorded in a book of which," let me say that again, "The Earth's history seems at times like a story recorded in a book, each page of which is torn into small pieces. Many of the pages and some of the pieces of each page are missing." So Smithson was really interested in looking at this partiality. He wanted to rethink place. He wanted to rethink the way that we understand our implications and legacies of being on the surface of this planet. Now, Spiral Jetty is so often categorized as a prime example of land art, a term that I am deeply suspicious of, and a category that Smithson himself did not use. I'm really nervous around this thing called land art, and as it has so many inferences that for me, with my own subjectivity, veer into unethical terrain, and also into factually incorrect narratives around Smithson. So there's a few things that really bother me about land art. That it's all about rejecting the museum, that it's located in remote places, that it's monumental, that it's spectacular, that it's all the same, that it's blind to complexities of power structures. And in fact, I was preparing this talk last week, and I was traveling on a train, and I have to admit, if I'm honest, I got a bit distracted. And I was playing with my telephone, and I was reading the art gossip pages. Right now, there's an advertisement for Lexus cars where a land artist has been invited to drive through the desert in order to make an example of land art to show this car. So the moment when an art historical or an art term can be completely co-opted into advertising, we need to rethink the heap of words that are being used. So I'm going to serpentine through some of these things I'm bothered about and through the interconnected nature of everything. In the late 1960s, Robert Smithson really developed this incredibly important notion of the non-site. So the non-site is all about the interconnected relationship of the museum to the world outside. And it's where he bought materials from a specific location, for example, the Franklin Quarry in New Jersey, or in Smithson's terms, a site, into the museum, the non-site. So this work, a non-site Franklin, New Jersey, is from 1968, and we are going to be testing out its exact position at site tomorrow at 11 a.m., which is going to be a lot of fun. This is an artwork that started with a journey. Mobility is so important in Smithson's work. It was a journey he took on June the 14th in 1968 with the artists Nancy Holt and Michael Heiser. And they traveled to New Jersey, which was the place where Smithson grew up. And what Smithson did, I'm just going to go back to this image, he was fascinated by these rocks in the Franklin Mineral Museum. These are really special rocks. If you shine a particular light on them, they have this amazing red and green colors that otherwise is invisible. And this is one of the many experiments we want to make during the forthcoming exhibition. Now, Smithson was a sculptor, in my mind, first and foremost. He was interested in material and how material can be brought together to think about interactions with objects. This work, Mirrors and Shelley Sands, made just before Spiral Jetty, will also be part of the exhibition. And it's an incredible sculpture that's absolutely about the ways in which we perceive. It's about being in the exhibition space, but it's about thinking of elsewhere. So how is this site, non-site idea relevant to Spiral Jetty? Well, Spiral Jetty is all about travel and movement. Indeed, this whole idea of land art directly developed with the American highway system. It's not accidental that the roads that lead from Spiral Jetty back out from Utah back to the Golden Spike Monument, that they're there and it's a journey. For Smithson, the journey was just as important as the artwork itself. And I want to tackle this idea of remoteness as one of my problems. I mean, I have lots of other problems with land art, but remoteness is the big one. Remote, it's a word that so often is used incorrectly. Remote is an adjective, it's not a noun. So in casual conversation, we talk about a certain place being remote, but really we need to qualify that term. And when I think about this idea of remote, I always say, think about where all of us are from. Probably we're from somewhere that's remote from something else. Me, I'm from the most rural part of a tiny island. Smithson was fascinated by islands because so often they're seen as being the epitome of remoteness. He was interested in their scale and in their size, two classic components of how we think about sculpture. He once said that a grain of sand can look like a boulder depending on where you look at it from. And he was really interested in thinking our planet as an island floating in the sea of the universe. And of course, in 1969, the year before Spiral Jetty was made, images of the Earth from outer space were everywhere. Smithson was always interested in this idea of the view from above. And in fact, in 1966, he was invited to be an artist consultant for an unrealized architectural development for the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. And this was a moment where he became really interested in seeing from above, this impossible human position. And this is when he started to rethink land. And he described this was the moment when his inklings of earthworks begun. So looking from the air turned sculptures into islands. Why was Smithson so fascinated by islands? Were there sites with tangible limits? They're peripheral, they're connected, they're always a projection screen for ideas, for wishes, for fears. And they're the places that feel the climate emergency first. They're fluid and they're open to changes. For Smithson, islands were speculative sites showing the constantly changing surface of our world and the limits of our knowledge. Some of his islands are locations for sculptural invention. Others are sites for investigating the formation of landscape, be that the making or the dissolution of land masses. So on my island, I grew up remote from the town, which was 7 miles away. This was a universe away from one place to another. An island is also remote from the mainland. And on my little island, we always hated it when people talked about the mainland, because that made us feel like a minor land. Now, of course, now I'm a grown-up, and I read philosophy, and I read Edouard Glissant and Gilles Deleuze. I know that the minor is a very powerful place to think from. This island of mine is remote from anywhere. It's very remote from Santa Fe. And I'm probably the only person who cares about that relationship. Connections are personal. Art that is powerful pulls on our own micro connections to speak to macro issues in a negotiation between the personal and the universal. Remoteness is relative and perceptual. So land art is usually remote from commercial art centres, but not remote in an abstract way. Spiral Jetty is not that far from Salt Lake City. It's an hour, 50 minutes drive. And it's even closer to Brigham City and Corrine, and not remote at all from the various off-gridders who live nearby. Remote often is used in a dismissive way. And just like maps, how remoteness, how place is written into history, impacts on how we orientate ourselves. Smithson was much more interested in peripheries than the centres, two codependent ideas of place. For him, New Jersey, where he grew up, was far more interesting than New York City. Or at least that's what he said while he was inhabiting New York City. New York City was remote, exotic from the island of Manhattan in the late 1960s. So Spiral Jetty, it's in a, let's say, peripheral place, let's not say remote, compared to the museums where Smithson wanted to exhibit. Now, I suspect some of you have been to Spiral Jetty. I know that for sure at least 6 of you have been. But as people interested in art, you all know it. How does that happen? Through the mobility of the artwork. Smithson made the film Spiral Jetty on returning to New York directly after finishing the work. And in his writings, he described New York as an urban desert. New York is remote to the Great Salt Lake. And he worked with what he called a bramble of fragments that he had filmed, both at the lake, but also in New Jersey. And this film, rather than being a document, it's a work in and of itself. And it's one that addresses time, place, histories, and materiality. Now, for Smithson, photography was essential to his work. 1970 was the moment when the camera, the analog camera, was in people's pockets. It was a technological development that was closely linked to travel. So you would go on a journey, then return with a slideshow for your friends of the sights that you had seen, making the elsewhere come closer. Now, in fact, the year before making Spiral Jetty, Smithson traveled to Chiapas and the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico with the artist Nancy Holt and the gallerist Virginia Dwan, and he worked with this very idea. Smithson, though, chose not to focus on the ancient structures that filled guidebooks. Instead, he was interested in future monuments, the buildings made at that time. The trio stayed in Hotel Palenque, a hotel in Chiapas that was rising into ruin. As it was being built, it was being rebuilt. The fate of all buildings. So think about doing home improvements. As soon as you fix one thing, you have to fix something else. Time wears down architecture. It was this that Smithson wanted to study, the architectural markers of human life. He was more interested in this location, Hotel Palenque, than the nearby Palenque buildings, remnants of a Mayan city-state that had ended in the 8th century, if we use the calendar that we're most familiar with. Smithson was fascinated by all these ways of counting time. So in 1972, Smithson was invited to give a lecture at the architectural school at Utah University, which is the closest academic organization to Spiral Jetty. And instead of talking about textbook architecture, he chose to show Hotel Palenque, a gesture of bringing an elsewhere to a here, an undoing of an art and architectural historic convention that turns artworks and buildings into a fictional narrative through comparative study that believes in the fiction that ideas travel in a clear, synchronous manner with a beginning, middle, and end. So Smithson was really interested in how our contemporary architecture would become a ruin in the future. 2 years before traveling to Palenque, he made a work called The Monuments of Passaic, where he photographed his home location, finding monuments formed of pipes and sandboxes. And he published this in an article in an art magazine, thus making his monuments mobile. Now, what I really love about flicking through this issue is that you can see just how radically different Smithson's work was to everything else that was going on. So, photography, this thing called land art, is umbilically linked to the camera. Photography is a fiction-making machine. We choose images, edit them, pick our best shots, leave out what we don't like. Photography is always a distortion. We often like to believe it has an indexical link to a time and place, but that's just not true. When we read a photograph, we need to do so through the contours of history that each image has been taken in. Spiral Jetty is exceedingly photogenic, just like the best movie stars. Every image of it pulls the artwork into the present, distorts the scale, removes time. When we look at it via its photographic mediation, we need to question what we are seeing. We need to realize that this artwork is becoming mobile through its image, and that it's always a fiction. Even if you look at authoritative websites like Holt Smithson Foundation's website, there's a fictionality through the image. Now, a myth of this thing called land art, and every time I say this phrase, I'm hoping to dissolve it a little more, is that artworks are monumental and monuments. To be monumental is to stand the test of time, to somehow stop that movement, to exceed epochs, to, like the buildings of Palenque, be there for far longer than the peoples who make them. Monuments are really tricky. Who chooses what is a monument? What are the associated networks of power? Can a sandbox be a monument, a waste pipe, a pile of earth, an image of a pre-existing overgrown structure? Is the abandoned oil jetty on the shore of the Great Salt Lake just before you reach Spiral Jetty any less a monument than the Golden Spike Monument? In one of my favorite essays by Smithson, he wrote in 1972, "No one wants to go on vacation to a garbage dump." And he asks why not. I mean, surely we should want to go them. These are the ultimate traces of human existence. Yet we turn our back on them. For Smithson, this was a problem. He wanted us to see, remember, and understand the destruction and devastation of humankind. Smithson was always interested in how our planet is first shaped by geological history and secondly by human history. He was aware that the sites he worked with had long histories of many peoples and they had long histories of ecological disaster. The year after making Spiral Jetty, Smithson made the one outdoor work that's still extant in Europe, Broken Circle Spiral Hill. It's located, or when it was built, it was located in a working sand quarry in the Netherlands, and a quarry that was slated to become a leisure destination as the mining had exhausted everything it could extract from the landscape. Broken Circle Spiral Hill is cut into the side of a terminal moraine, and it exists in a sand quarry. So geological history and human history. It's an artwork of two parts. Broken Circle is a semicircular jetty built into the quarry lake that has this wonderful reflecting water, while Spiral Hill grows into a cone-shaped hill behind the lake. And there's this great spiraling path that leads to the top, from where the quarry and Broken Circle can be seen from above. And at the center is an immovable, giant boulder deposited by ancient glacial movements. Now, Smithson was really interested in what he called landscapes that suggest prehistory. He said that as an artist, it's interesting to take on the persona of a geological agent where humans actually become part of that process rather than overcoming it. So Smithson was committed to working with landscapes scarred by industry, thinking through the future of exhausted landscapes. At Spiral Jetty, the spiral continuously changes form as nature, industry, and time take their effect. In its more than half-century lifetime, Spiral Jetty's visibility and relationship to the site around it has changed as the waters of the lake have risen and then dropped following years of sustained drought, rapid population increase, and water diversion. When Smithson first made Spiral Jetty in 1970, it sat on its site as any jetty would. It spiraled out into the lake. Some years later, the water rose, and then it could only be seen from above. Then, in 1993, the waters receded, and it came out again, encrusted with salt crystals. The current water of the Great Salt Lake is at its lowest since records began. When you get there, if we were all to go together tomorrow to the Great Salt Lake, we would see the waters a long way from Spiral Jetty. The water will never cover this jetty again. When you go to this site, you see with your own eyes the impact of the climate emergency and the opportunity costs of industrialization. It can incontrovertibly be seen with your own eyes. And when you get there, just like a movie star, Spiral Jetty is older and smaller and less beautiful than it looks in pictures. But then, when you go there, inevitably, you will take your own photographs. And then when you go home and you grumble how it was older and smaller, you look at your pictures, and then the magic happens. The myth begins, and it's a sculpture that exceeds itself. Spiral Jetty is a sculpture and a ruin, and it's constantly being built through representation and re-representation. So I want to close with really what I feel Smithson's work is doing in the present, in our version of the present, in this version of the present, all nature, all landscape is marked by occupation. As I said before, the surface of this planet is shaped by geological history, then human history. We humans, though, are indeed nature. We mark the surface of the earth and the surrounding atmosphere with all of our activities. We are all culpable. We claim to know nature through our invented ideas of landscape. And then just as we fear we're losing it, we create nostalgic stands-in that have nothing to do with the facts of nature. In the realm of art, we created centuries ago the idea of landscape to create representations. And these serve to make our idea of nature controllable and mobile. So to think with Smithson in the present is to think deeper about how we humans impact every minute and every day. And perhaps what Smithson can do is he can get us to think with more depth and greater acuity. And it's with this that we can change possible futures. So I will stop here, not for a lack of anything to say. And if anyone has any, well, the standard thing you say is, if anyone has any questions, of course, ask them. But what I like even more are contestations and arguments and corrections. So please don't hold back.
It's really an interesting proposition to position yourself with an artist, right? Vis-a-vis an artist. What you're proposing to stand with, maybe alongside of an artist. But it's also good to think other relationships, to think, through, against, beyond an artist, right? To be critical. Right? So I think this is one of the interesting things about, Holt and Smithson and land art and your critique of land art, to some extent from sort of within that machine, it's that it lends itself to a critique that questions not just human relationship to land, but and place and all of the sort of theoretical relationships that one can think of. But relationality itself is a thing that it pulls up, right? Relationship of that land to that salt lake. So anyway, I just think it's an interesting endeavor that you're taking on with not just the show, but your position at the foundation. But it would be interesting to sort of go that extra step to be, critical of that.
I mean, thank you, Mario. I mean, you're really kind of talking to my heart here. In fact, Matthew and I were talking before we got ready for this talk that I've given about why is art so important? It's because it's full of complexities. And I always think that when I go and look at art, I don't want to just have fun and be entertained. If I want to have fun and be entertained, I'll go out dancing. Art is not going to do that for me. Art is there to be really, really complex. And I think when an artist places something out into the world, it's being placed into the sphere of critical discourse. And I think that when we look at art, it's not about liking or disliking it. It's thinking, what are we doing with these propositions? And I think being critical of all artists is essential. Sorry, artists in the audience. I think that if an artist is putting something into the world, you have to ask questions of it. And that's not about being negative. It's about doing the job that art is there to do. If it's something that's pretty and you go, that's lovely, what's the point? We might as well look at some pretty pictures of kittens or something like that. It's got to do more. And our job as people going to look at art is we have to ask these questions and we have to deal with these complexities.
Hello. My question is, his sculptures, a lot of them have an ephemeral character, and they're embracing change. And how can you talk about the complexity of the archival and the preservation and embracing change in the artwork, but preserving it?
I think it's a really great question. I always think that artworks have lives. And all of us, we all have lives, and we know that our surfaces change over time. I didn't used to have any grey hair at one point. Now I have a whole bunch of it. All of us change, or we bump into something, we have a mark on our hand. This is part of the wonderful thing of being human, the changing surface of ourselves. And what's even more wonderful than that is the way our ideas change and develop over time. So with an artwork like Spiral Jetty, I always say it's not what it was, and what it is now is not what it will be. It will disappear. It's not going to be there. I would say, I don't know, probably we've got 16 years or so, then it won't be there anymore. But of course it will still be there through the rumors, through the photography, through the films, through the art historical documentation of it. I really think we have to enable artworks to have these lives. Smithson is a very particular artist, and this entropic life, it's a term that he really liked to use, is part of the matter and material of his works. To take other artists, to think about Nancy Holt, whose legacy we also look after at Holt Smithson Foundation, completely different animal of artwork. Her work, Sun Tunnels, she sees that being in the world until the end of time. So it needs to be preserved. It's always a negotiation. And I think there's never an answer that can be generic for everything. You have to take the artwork on its own terms. What's really important with Spiral Jetty is that it's never rebuilt to what it was more than 50 years ago. Because then you take its life away. It needs to show the scars of time, because that's right for that artwork.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to follow up and to say, would you agree that by Robert Smithson making this work, that these were kind of expectations? I mean, having a loss of control in nature, is that, I don't know how far he could foresee that.
I mean, I'm going to answer your question in a complicated way, because it's always nice to do that. I think that there's a real difference between the artist and the artwork. So once an artist releases an artwork into the world, it has its own life. So really thinking about what I was just saying to your question. We can never know what any other human being thinks. We sometimes like to think that we can, but you can't get into anyone else's mind. What were Smithson's intentions? Impossible to know. But it was clear of what he was interested in. So I think one of the kind of myths around land art is that the artists who made it, and this is why I hate this term so much, were not interested in today's language, the ecological impact of human beings' life on the world. Smithson was fascinated by that. And he was really against the ecologists of his time, not because he was against ecology, but because he didn't think it was possible to turn back landscape to a moment when human beings didn't exist. That's just a fantasy. But having said that, and this really goes to Mario's point of view, Smithson did things that we would never do today. There's one work he made called Glue Pour, where he poured a bunch of toxic orange glue down a hill to demonstrate relationships between nature and human-made substances. I mean, you would just be hounded into some kind of, I don't know, jail if you did that today. That we would never do that. But Smithson did it, and we can't deny that he did it. So I think this criticality, really linking these 3 points together, that's how we need to come to artwork. And artwork does its work, it's why we call it artwork, far beyond the life of the artist. We have to let it do that.
Thank you. My name is Herman de Weert. I'm a little bit disappointed about your observation that his work not only will disappear, but has to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to ask you, would you allow for a viewpoint that it be restored? I mean, we are restoring artworks all the time, all over the world, and artworks from all kinds of civilizations. Why not Spiral Jetty?
I really like disappointment. Disappointment is so human. Like, all of us know disappointment. Oh, we know disappointment so well. So I'm actually pleased that you're disappointed. And let me try and justify this assertion that I've made. Spiral Jetty, it's a mediated artwork. So it exists. Like, we could all go on a trip tomorrow morning. Let's leave 8:30 with some lunch. We could go there, and we could see the artwork. But then we bring it back with us through our memories, through the ways in which it has been spoken about. So Spiral Jetty will not disappear, but the materiality of the jetty made of a spiral of rocks is going to disappear. So it's that sense that it's an artwork of many things. And for Smithson, this mediatized nature of it was so important. And often when I try and explain this, you know, I kind of really come back to this idea of the artwork having a life. One of the great things about being human is we've only got a certain amount of time. So me, I have 160 years, I have decided. And there's so much that I want to do. And so I've really got to pick and choose, because it goes beyond what any human can do in 160 years. It's that sense of the end point makes us think about it. And we often say at Holt Smithson Foundation that the way we interact with Spiral Jetty is a mirror to how we interact with the surface of the planet. We can't build it back, because then it will just disappear again. Smithson was always interested in this concept of entropy, and it comes from the second law of thermodynamics, and it was a term that from around, 1964 or so, was ricocheting through literature and through popular culture. He wanted the artwork to disappear. And I am convinced that Spiral Jetty will become even more important. It will vibrate with greater frequency once we cannot go there. Because as human beings, we deal with disappointment. We deal with nostalgia. We deal with what once was and no longer is now. I think that's all part of the conceptualization of the work. So I'm sorry that it's disappointing, but I think it's really important that it's disappointing.
I want to ask you, because before you were with the Holt Smithson Foundation, I spoke to you earlier, I think your background is very interesting, and I think the audience would be interested in hearing about what you actually have accomplished, not just now, but because you were asked to create this foundation, and you were somewhere else, and I think it'd be interesting to hear about that.
I can't do that. I'm British. We're educated to never talk about ourselves. So I can't do it, but I will just say two things. Prior to, so I moved to Santa Fe in 2018 with this great honor of starting this foundation. What did I do before? I became obsessed with the power of art. I'm such a believer in art. And I think that we have to believe in it for its complexity, for its possibilities to open our mind. So that's what I did before. And I read some books and did some other stuff. But no, I'm far too, even though I can talk and talk, I'm far too shy to talk about myself.